I didn't make a scene. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there on my daughter's front porch in the November cold, holding a pecan pie. I'd driven 4 hours to bring her, and listened to her tell me that Thanksgiving was already full. That was 8 months ago. By Easter, she had 23 missed calls from me she hadn't returned. By June, she had something else entirely. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name doesn't matter as much as what I'm about to tell you. What matters is that I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a general contractor in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I raised my daughter Melissa. My daughter, alone from the time she was 9 years old after her mother passed from ovarian cancer. I worked double shifts. I missed sleep. I never missed a school play, a soccer game, or a tuition payment. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest. Her name is Melissa. She married a man named, I'll call him what he was, her husband, 5 years ago. He works in finance in Nashville, wears suits that cost more than my first truck. I never disliked him because he had money. I disliked him because of the way he looked at my boots when I walked into their house, like I'd tracked something in. Melissa changed after that wedding, slowly at first, the way water changes the shape of a rock. You don't notice it until one day you reach down and the edge is gone. She stopped calling on Sunday evenings like she used to, started calling less and less, and when she did call, she sounded distracted, like she was watching something across the room while she talked to me. She started using words like optics and our circle in ways that made me feel like I was on the outside of a conversation about myself. I told myself it was the adjustment period. Newlyweds find their rhythm. I gave it space. Then their son was born. My grandson Eli, 7 pounds 4 ounces, born on a Tuesday in March, and I drove straight from a job site in Cookville, still had drywall dust on my jacket, to be at that hospital. I held him for 45 minutes before anyone asked me to hand him back. I cried in the parking garage afterward. The kind of crying you do when something fills you up so full it has to go somewhere. Eli changed things. For a while, it felt like it used to. Melissa would send photos. I'd drive up on weekends when she'd let me. I'd fix things around their house, replaced their water heater, rebuilt their back deck, regrouted the master bath. Her husband never said thank you, but he also never said no. That was our arrangement, unspoken. Then he got promoted, new title, new salary, new neighborhood. They moved to a suburb of Nashville I'd never heard of, into a house that had a wine cellar and a media room and a homeowners association that sent letters if your grass was a 1/4 inch too long. I helped them move. I drove my truck down with 3 of my guys and we loaded and unloaded everything in one day. Her husband ordered pizza for the crew, which I thought was decent of him, until Melissa told me later that he'd expensed it to his company. After the move, the calls got shorter. The weekend visits became monthly. Monthly became every other month became holidays only, and even then. Last Thanksgiving, I called in October to ask about the plan. She said they were hosting. She said they were hosting. She said there'd be room for me. She gave me a time. 2 o'clock. I confirmed it twice. I left Knoxville at 9 in the morning on Thanksgiving Day, stopped and got gas, got coffee, drove straight through. I had that pecan pie. I'd baked it myself the night before, her grandmother's recipe, the one she used to request every single year growing up. I pulled into their driveway at 1:55. There were 6 cars I didn't recognize parked along the curb. I walked up to the door and knocked. I heard noise inside, music, laughter, a lot of voices. Her husband answered. He was wearing a blazer. He looked at me the way you look at a package that arrived at the wrong address. He said, "Oh, we didn't think you were actually coming." I said, "I told Melissa twice. I confirmed the time." He glanced back into the house. "It's just, we have a lot of guests. It's more of a dinner party situation this year. I stood there with that pie in my hands and I looked past him into the foyer. I could see people I had never met in my life filling my daughter's living room. Catered trays on the dining table. Bartender in the corner with a liquor setter. Melissa appeared behind her husband. She looked at me and then looked at him and then looked at me again. She said, "Dad, I didn't think you'd make the drive." "You knew I was coming," I said. "I confirmed it." "I confirmed it. I know, but—" She lowered her voice. "We're sort of doing a thing this year, with the neighbors and some of his colleagues. It's kind of a different vibe. A different vibe." I had driven 4 hours with a pie I baked at midnight to hear the words, "a different vibe." I looked at my daughter for a long moment. I thought about the night she was 10 years old and had a fever of 103, and I sat on the edge of her bed until 4 in the morning putting cold washcloths on her forehead. I thought about the used Pontiac I bought her when she turned 16 and spent 3 weekends in the driveway with her teaching her how to parallel park. I thought about the checks I'd written for her college tuition, her first and last month's rent in Nashville, her wedding venue deposit when her husband said he didn't have liquid assets available at the moment. I didn't say any of that. I said, "All right." I handed her the pie. She took it. I turned around, walked back to my truck, and drove home. I didn't cry this time. I just drove. 4 hours of interstate, and I watched the Tennessee hills go dark, and I thought about what I was going to do. I had been paying the mortgage on that house. This is the part I should explain. When they bought the house after the move, her husband was between his old position and his new one, and there was a 3-month gap in his income. He came to me, not her, him, and asked if I could carry the mortgage for those 3 months. It was $300-400 a month. I said yes. 3 months became 6. 6 became 14. I was paying it because Melissa asked me to keep paying it, said they were still getting settled, said her husband was restructuring his portfolio, which I later learned meant he'd lost a significant amount in bad investments and was quietly trying to rebuild without anyone knowing. I had been paying $3,400 a month for 14 months on a house I had never been formally invited to a holiday dinner inside. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I called my bank. I told them I wanted to cancel the automatic payment tied to a specific account number. The woman on the phone asked if I was sure. I said yes. She processed it in about 90 seconds. I did not call Melissa afterward. I did not send a text. I went back to work. The first call came 11 days later. It came from her husband, not from her. He was calm in the way that people are calm when they are actually not calm at all. Tight, deliberate, each word landing like he'd chosen it carefully. He said the mortgage payment hadn't come through. I said I knew. He said there must be some kind of error. I said there wasn't. There was a long pause. He said, "Walter, I mean, sir, we have an arrangement." I said we had an understanding. The understanding was that it was temporary. That was 14 months ago. Another pause. He said, "This puts us in a very difficult position." I said, "I imagine it does." He hung up. Melissa called 4 minutes later. She was not using her quiet dinner party voice anymore. She asked me what I was doing. I told her I'd cancelled the payment. She asked why. I told her I'd driven 4 hours on Thanksgiving and been told I was the wrong vibe for her living room. She said that wasn't fair, that she had explained it, that I was being dramatic. I told her I wasn't being dramatic. I told her I was 64 years old and I had been paying $3,400 a month to support a household that was embarrassed to have me at the table, and I had decided I was done. She said, "You can't just do this." I said, "I already did." She cried. I hated that she cried, but I stayed on the line and I didn't take it back. She said her husband would find a way to cover it, that they would be fine, that she just needed me to give them some time. I said, "That's what I told myself the first 7 months." We hung up. I won't pretend the next few weeks were easy. I sat in my kitchen some nights and ate dinner alone and wondered if I'd made a mistake. I'm her father. She's my only child. No matter what she'd done or become or who she'd let her husband turn her into, she was still the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest watching football on Sunday afternoons. That doesn't just go quiet. But then something started happening. Small things, at first, that came through other people. My neighbor, Judy, she'd known Melissa since she was in elementary school, told me she'd run into a woman from Melissa's neighborhood at a church fundraiser. This woman had made a comment in passing, something about how Melissa and her husband seemed to be having a rough patch. Judy didn't think anything of it at the time. But then she mentioned that the same woman had said something about the house being listed for sale. I didn't react to that, not outwardly, but I made note of it. A few weeks later, my old buddy Ray, we'd worked together on job sites for 20 years, told me his nephew worked at a title company in Nashville. Ray's nephew had mentioned, in the way that people in small industries mention things, that a property in that suburb had gone into the early stages of foreclosure proceedings. He didn't know it was my daughter's house. He was just talking. I knew. I called a lawyer I'd worked with on a contract dispute years back. His name is Gerald, and he's sharp, and he doesn't waste words. I told him what I knew. I told him about the 14 months of payments. I told him I had documentation of every transfer, every amount, every date. He told me that was good. He told me we should talk further. What came out of those conversations, and out of some things the lawyer uncovered through other channels, was this. Her husband had not simply lost money in bad investments. He had been moving money through a series of accounts in a way that his company's compliance department was starting to look at very carefully. He had been using funds that were not entirely his to use, and some of those funds, some of what had allowed him to maintain the appearance of the life they were living while his legitimate income struggled to keep up, had a paper trail that led, indirectly, back to payments made on his behalf that he had not disclosed properly. My 14 months of mortgage payments had been listed in a financial document as a family loan of a specific amount, which had then been factored into a credit application for a home equity line he'd taken out without telling Melissa. He had used my money to borrow more money, and he had not told his wife he'd done it. I want to be precise about what I felt when I learned this, because it wasn't what you might expect. It wasn't rage. It was something heavier and quieter than rage, a kind of grief for my daughter who had let this man reshape her into someone who turned her father away at the door and had not even known the full extent of what she was protecting. I called Melissa. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was different than it had been the last time we spoke. She sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I didn't lead with what I knew. I asked her how she was. She said she'd been better. I asked if we could meet. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said yes. We met at a diner in Cookeville, halfway between Knoxville and Nashville. She was already there when I arrived. She had Eli with her in his car seat. He was 14 months old by then, just starting to pull himself up to standing, big eyes looking at everything. She looked at me when I sat down across from her and she said, "Dad, I think I'm in trouble." I said, "I know." She asked me what I knew. I told her. Not everything, and not fast. I told her carefully, the way you tell someone something that is going to hurt them, with your voice steady and your eyes on their face. She cried. Not the way she'd cried on the phone when she wanted me to keep paying the mortgage. This was different. This was the sound of someone putting things together in their head that they didn't want to have to put together. Her husband had been under investigation by his company's internal compliance team for 6 weeks. She hadn't known. He had told her there was a routine review happening and not to worry. She had not worried because she had been trained in the 5 years of that marriage to accept his version of events as the final version. He had also, she told me, with her voice just above a whisper, been seeing someone else for at least a year. She'd found out 3 days before we met. She'd found messages on an old tablet they shared. She hadn't confronted him yet. She didn't know what to do. I reached across the table and I took her hand. I did not say, "I told you so." I did not reference Thanksgiving or the pie or the 4-hour drive or the 14 months of $3,400. None of that mattered in that diner, with my daughter's hand in mine and her son reaching for the edge of the table. I said, "Tell me what you need." What she needed, it turned out, was a lot of things. A lawyer, a different one than Gerald, one who handled divorces, somewhere to stay while the situation with the house got sorted, someone to sit with her when she finally had the conversation with her husband, someone to drive to Nashville and pick up a car seat and 2 suitcases and a box of Eli's things and bring them back to Knoxville. I did all of it. Her husband was asked to resign from his firm in February. The compliance review had turned into something with significantly more serious implications, and while I don't have all the details and wouldn't share them here if I did, I know that he cooperated in a way that reduced his personal exposure while ending his career in that industry. The house went on the market. After everything was untangled, the home equity line, the outstanding mortgage, the legal fees, Melissa came out of it with enough to start clean and not much more. She's living 20 minutes from me now, renting a small house in a good school district for when Eli is old enough. She's working again. She'd stopped when they moved to Nashville because her husband had said it didn't make sense for her to work given his income, which I now understand was a way of keeping her dependent and isolated. She started back in her field, occupational therapy, and found a position at a clinic here in Knoxville. She's good at it. She always was. Eli is 18 months old. He learned my name last month. He calls me Pop. I still have the recipe card for that pecan pie, my mother's handwriting, a little faded, kept in a plastic sleeve in a drawer in my kitchen. I made it again at Christmas. This time I made it in my own house. Melissa and Eli were here. Just the 3 of us. A ham, some sweet potatoes, the pecan pie. We watched football in the afternoon. Eli fell asleep on my chest somewhere in the 3rd quarter. I looked down at him and then looked across the room at my daughter, who was watching us from the kitchen doorway with a cup of coffee and something on her face that I hadn't seen in years. She looked like herself. I've thought a lot about what I would have done differently. The honest answer is not much. Not paying the mortgage for 14 months, that I would have stopped sooner. But the rest of it, driving up there on Thanksgiving, handing her the pie and turning around without a scene, cancelling that payment with 90 seconds and a phone call and no drama. Yeah, I do all of that the same way. I'm 64 years old. I know what I'm worth. Not in dollars, in the sense that I know what I've given and what I've built and what I showed up for when it was hard. Nobody gets to make me feel small for wearing work boots to their dinner party. Not even my own daughter. Especially not someone who was eating at my table before she had her own. Eli is going to know me. He's going to grow up knowing where he comes from. He's going to know that his grandfather drove 4 hours in November with a homemade pecan pie, because that's what you do for the people you love. And when he's old enough to understand the rest of the story, I'll tell him that too, because I want him to know that love doesn't mean letting people walk over you. It means knowing when to say, all right, turning around and making a 90-second phone call. The rest takes care of itself. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in any grand philosophical way, just in the plain, practical way that you think about things when you're 64 and you've lived long enough to watch what you plant actually grow. What I planted in Melissa's life was everything I had. Time, money, presence, patience. I showed up. That's the whole of it, really. I just kept showing up. When her mother died and she was 9 years old and didn't understand why the house felt different, I showed up. When she was 16 and nervous behind the wheel of that used Pontiac, I showed up. When she called me the night before her wedding and said she was scared, I showed up. 14 months of mortgage payments. That was me showing up in the only language her husband seemed to understand. And when she stood in that doorway on Thanksgiving and told me it was a different vibe, I showed up for myself. That's the part people don't talk about enough. Showing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's the thing that makes every other kind of showing up sustainable. I think about what would have happened if I'd swallowed it. If I'd handed her the pie, smiled, and driven 4 hours home and kept paying that mortgage and told myself that's what fathers do. Maybe things would have looked fine on the surface for another year. Maybe two. But Melissa would still be in that house, still isolated, still accepting her husband's version of events as the only version, still not knowing about the home equity line, still not knowing about the other woman. The money I kept paying would have kept that whole structure standing just long enough to collapse on her worse. Sometimes the most useful thing a person can do is stop holding up a wall that was going to fall anyway. That's not cause and effect in any neat, comfortable sense. It's messier than that. My grandson Eli is 18 months old, and his parents are divorced, and his father's career is gone, and his mother is starting over at 34. None of that is clean, but Eli is going to grow up knowing his mother. The real version of her, the one who went back to work, who drives herself to the grocery store, who laughs like she used to laugh. That version of her only exists because something gave way. I think the truest thing I know about integrity is that it costs something in the short run. Almost always, the night I cancelled that payment, I sat in my kitchen and I wasn't sure I'd done the right thing. I wasn't righteous about it. I was just tired and sad and a little scared that I'd lose her entirely. Integrity doesn't feel like a victory when you're in the middle of it. It feels like a Tuesday night alone with a bowl of soup, wondering if you made a mistake. But you don't build character by doing the comfortable thing. You build it by doing the honest thing, especially when it's hard, especially when the person on the other end of it is someone you love. Melissa needed to see what her life actually was. I couldn't show her that by continuing to soften the edges of it with my checkbook. And resilience. That's not something you manufacture. It's something you find out you have when the ground shifts under you and you have to move anyway. Melissa found it. I watched her find it. She's 20 minutes from me now, building something real. And she found out she was capable of that only because she had no other option. Eli calls me Pop. That's enough. That's more than enough.